and welcome to Dialogue Options. My name is Ellen and I'm joined this week by Leon and Ben, and we're going to be chatting about what makes a good video game villain. We're going to be talking through some of our favourites and what we think makes them so great, or terrible, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. So, Ben, do you want to kick off with one of your suggestions?
Yeah, so obviously when we were talking about this before filming, I decided to go for Dutch van der Linde from Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2. And I guess the Dutch I really wanted to focus on was in Red Dead Redemption 2. Now obviously in the first game, Dutch is sort of the catalyst for the plot. He's the reason why John Marston is sort of sent out to sort of track down the remnants of this gang. But we don't really see much of Dutch in that game. You sort of find him at the end, hold out somewhere else, and then John dispatches with him. But then in Red Dead Redemption 2, we are sort of given this whole backstory for Dutch, but not in a sort of conventional sense. We just sort of flash back. Like we actually play through, John's and Dutch's sort of time together. I think for me, what that did is it gave you the chance to sort of see how Dutch operated, why he became this sort of most wanted figure for the sort of the FBI, or the formative FBI in that stages, but why people would follow him, why people would trust Dutch. And throughout Red Dead Redemption 2, you kind of also understand why he loses that trust from certain people. And it's a really interesting way of exploring a character. Oh, sorry, I've got a little bit of fluff there. But I thought it was a really interesting way of exploring a character who, for the most part, has always existed as kind of like plot device, especially in the original game. Whereas in 2, there are times where you empathise with Dutch, there are times where you almost sympathise with Dutch, and there are times where you think, come on, mate, like, the plan's not working. Like, we've had enough now.
He always has a plan.
He
always has a plan.
And it's maybe that's why the length of that game is designed so you can sort of like begin to like Dutch, then slowly hate him again. But I think it's part of like a wider trend in games where we're sort of moving away from these kind of one note, this person is like, you must fight this person because they are bad, to a more kind of nuanced take of understanding why this person or why this villain or antagonist is doing what they do. Without wanting to go over something we've talked about a fair bit on Games Radar, but obviously I think The Last of Us Part 2 does this very well. I thought you were
going to bring that one up.
Sorry. I mean, you can't...
You can't not bring it up in that context. You're right.
Because I think, the game obviously doesn't really have a defined antagonist, Depending on who plays the game, they might see Abby as the antagonist, they might see Ellie as the antagonist. But I think it's role-playing games can do this quite well, but we are starting to see more blockbuster games adopt this approach of, well, you're going up against them, they're your opposition, but are they the bad guy? Are they the villain? And I think that's a trend I'm really enjoying seeing, because it does bring a little bit more nuance to stories.
I feel like with Dutch, I guess it speaks to how good the storytelling in Red Dead 2 is, the fact that he was just horrible in the first game, but also in my memory, I honestly haven't played it since it first came out, but in my memory, most of the times that Dutch is in the first game, he's a little bit pathetic. Like he's not the charismatic leader that he is in the second game naturally. So I think the way they managed to go from, oh, I really hate him, actually he's quite charming and I quite like being led by him, oh, I hate him again, is really like, there's not many games that manage to do that kind of, you hate him, you love him, but you hate him again, and it's just...
And I think it's really interesting in Red Dead 2, because there's obviously in Micah, you've got another type of villain who is essentially just straight up skis. Absolute, get him out of here. Like, he's the one you want to take on.
He's definitely a villain.
Yeah, there's he is sort of, even then though, like, not in a villain, like, kind of boring way, he's just constantly needling, like, absolute grease from top to bottom. But again, it's fun to take him on, and but yeah,
Dutch,
I think... Oh, sorry, Liam.
No, go.
I was going to say, it is that sort of thing where to have... I don't really see it as the game having its cake and eating it. I think it's the sort of thing where, you sometimes do need a little bit of like a reason to go at somebody. You don't want a villain to be too likable, where you get to the extent of, no, I think I don't particularly want to fight this person. I kind of understand with them. So having Micah there as well, dripping poison in Dutch's ear, also makes for quite a...
Calling you Black Lung.
Yeah.
Black Lung!
Dutch is interesting though, because he's kind of selfish in that the only thing he really cares about is his dream that he's trying to sell to other people. And he reminds me a bit of those kind of character archetype you get in in films and TV, where you have the sort of the lazy, good for nothing sort of boyfriend who's always neglecting the girlfriend, but like giving her just enough kind of like, we'll get married, or I'll leave her, whatever those kind of sort of promises are, that just keep the girlfriend hanging on long enough, and they can do whatever they want. And Dutch is kind of like that character almost, and the gang is like the girlfriend that he sort of needs them and kind of makes use of them, but all he really wants is what he wants, and he just feeds them enough of a promise of like the wedding or whatever to keep them on board with essentially getting him what he wants. So he's quite sort of selfish, and like I say, I think he said pathetic earlier. He's like, sort of needy, weak man really, that somehow has found a way to control these people and get what he wants, but never give them what they want.
You kept the faith, Arthur. You always kept it. And I ain't losing it now.
Oh, I like. I've just finished Ghost of Tsushima, I forget how they pronounce it now. And the villain in that, Khotan Khan, is like just this really sort of fascinating character, because he's definitely the bad guy in terms of the game, because he's the invading army's leader, but he's just sort of very calm and matter of fact about it, and he's definitely a bad guy because he kills people and he does like horrible things, but he's just kind of doing a job, and it's a really sort of interesting kind of take, because he's not maniacal, he's not like screaming from the ramparts as the soldiers open fire. He's just kind of like, I'm trying to do this job, I've come to invade you, it's what I'm here to do, and the fact that you keep making it difficult is why I have to keep doing bad things. And his whole manner is kind of like, you could transport it into almost any kind of job role, where he just thinks he's brilliant, he thinks he's got it sussed, he thinks he's the best there is at this job, which in this case happens to be invading and subjugating an entire country. But he's like almost like a surgeon or a businessman. He walks into a room and he's like, I am the shit. And when it doesn't work, it's frustrating in the same way that someone won't do what you want because they can't see how good you are at what you do. And everything that sort of happens is like, you've made me do this. Like, if you would just surrender, then we wouldn't have any of this bloodshed. If you just like submit to Mongol rule, everything would be okay, but you keep causing all these problems, so I'm having to do bad things. And it's Patrick Gallagher who performs it, and he just does it so well. Like, he's just very calm, never raises his voice, he's always very much kind of like, well, this because this, and he's talking a lot to one of the other characters. He kidnaps someone, and then they have discussions, and it's all just very calm, like boardroom talk almost. And he's just a really good it's just a really good performance. That I was just excited to see him every time he came on screen, even though I know
the intended reaction.
No, but like, even though it's like, I know you're the bad guy, and at some point I'm going to stick this sword in you a lot. But he's just really like sort of magnetic, charismatic, and sort of just walks around very calmly. And it was just a really nice take on a bad guy. Like, 'cause I think video games generally, you either have like, raving madmen or monsters or whatever, and the sort of same nuance with like Last of Us that lets you have this kind of, I don't know who the bad guy is kind of now. You have a bad guy that doesn't come across bad. Like, I don't think he thinks he's the bad guy, he thinks he's the good guy, and all these people not surrendering are making it harder for him to be the good guy because he has to do bad things.
I don't know what, maybe it's the idea when you mentioned then the whole like, look what you made me do, if you just surrendered this wouldn't have happened. It makes me think of Pagan Min from Far Cry, if only because we all know the Easter egg that a few of the Far Cry games have, where if you don't cause trouble at the beginning, if you wait, then you get what you want and the game ends. And with Far Cry 4? His
Far Cry 4,
isn't it? If you wait, then he'll come back and help you do the thing that you set out to do in the first place. It's only because you leave and you start causing trouble that he gets a bit upset.
Pagan Min definitely has like an unmistakable kind of vein of insanity. There's almost like a Joker like hint to sort of the way he reacts and does things. Like he enjoys like evil essentially, and he's quite sort of insane essentially, the way he reacts and does things and the way he escalates things. But Kotan Khan, it's like there's no insanity there. I think there's almost like a kind of a boring middle management kind of edge to how he deals with things. Like, I mean, he does do bad things, but it's almost like, well, filled out Form B, so now we have to do this. It's that kind of, you've done this, so I have to do this. It's not like I don't make the rules kind of approach to it. He never really like goes full on screaming madman. He's just kind of like A causes B. That's just the way the world is. And unfortunately, in his world, you're the A that is causing B because you're not, you're not just bowing down and going, okay, we accept you as our leader.
So I'll ask you once again, Samurai. Do you surrender?
There's another thing I thought that was interesting, what you said, Leon, was about being excited to see a villain on screen. I think the only time I've ever... there probably have been more times. One of the major times I've had that in a game, I'm really sorry to go back to the Far Cry well, but it is Vaz.
Please do.
It is Vaz. Like, every time, because Far Cry 3 protagonist, or you, is so terminally dull. Like, I adore Far Cry 3, but the main character in that game is just a real wet rag. Like, just really bland. You kind of, and then Vaz comes on screen and he's just charisma personified. Like, you want to hear what he says. He's all over the shop. You don't know what's going to happen. You're invested.
Yes, tell me the definition of insanity. What's it?
What's going to happen this time? And I think it's probably quite revealing that as soon as like Vaz is sort of nixed from that game, you're just a little less invested. It's a little less fun. Like, and I think sorry, Liam. I
think it makes it almost like, I know, like as soon as he's gone, you're like, well, what do I do now? But it's interesting. I think it almost makes it better that he is there and then he's gone, because it puts like a bottle, like puts glass around that kind of whole relationship and performance, and then you're like, oh god, I'm still here and I've still got to do all this sort of stuff, and then like you never have the same kind of magnetic sort of relationship with anyone else in that game afterwards. But I think if he'd have been there till the end and the final boss fight, I don't think he'd have been remembered as well.
That's very true, and I think it is that case of like, you sometimes. I'm struggling to bring an example to mind, but actually, okay, I'll go for Fallen Order and the sort of the second sister.
She's because she's great when you finally find out about her back history and stuff, and you have a lot of sympathy for her.
Yeah.
And you realise that she's like, it's sort of almost like not her fault, but then it's also not anyone's. And like she genuinely, I would have liked more of her, and a kind of a road to redemption kind of thing. But
I think it's also the thing there as well, is like you have that amazing boss fight with her halfway through the game, but she's still there, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna have to fight you again, and it's kind of like a little bit of diminishing returns. I suppose as well, it's not really her fault that the final boss fight with her is then overshadowed by something else entirely. But you do sometimes have with games that, and like Vaz is a really good point actually. Like, if you kept going back to that like where do you go? Whereas actually, like him sort of dying about 2/3 of the way into the game, you do have that moment of like, oh wow, okay, what now? And unfortunately, it's like a kind of a South African arms dealer who's just a little less interesting, and swimming to the other island, and you're a little bit like, oh, okay, all right then. So it's just a different place I need to liberate now. But but it is that sort of thing. Like when you do get a villain. I suppose you could also make the case for Heath Ledger's Joker, and I mean that's a very. I was
literally just thinking that whole like Batman joke. A good villain, a hero needs the good villain, and as much as the villain needs the hero, like it is. They need each other. The relationship doesn't exist unless like they have a charisma, essentially.
I mean, this is the perfect opportunity for a notable mention of Mark Hamill's Joker in the Arkham series, because that is a series that does a very good job of having those two constantly going at each other and that sort of friction between the two. And I mean, I think all of the Arkham series has like a load of fantastic villains, but it's obviously the Joker, and Mark Hamill has spent years perfecting that Joker down to a T, and he's a really good foil in those games.
As much as I love a villain who you empathise with for a little bit, or you see like their downfall, sometimes it is nice. Maybe it's just because you have to engage less of your brain to like figure out this sort of moral ambiguity. But sometimes I just like with Vass and other like Gaunter O'Dim in The Witcher 3, people who are just like, oh, you're a nasty piece of work, like, and also there's something a little bit scarier to me about not being able to see any logic behind what they're doing, because it's harder to see what, obviously the end is probably a boss battle, that kind of goes without saying, but it's harder to see what the means to an end are when someone is just like, I just like hurting people, I want these things and no one's going to stop me, rather than, you know, please surrender and let me have my thing. No, okay, this is where the storyline comes from. And it kind of like more having a villain who is that twisted. I'm kind of like, I don't see any way out of this. Like, what do I do? This guy just wants to hurt me and everyone that I arrived on this island with, or...
You know, in the past, like I say, it was a monster villain would sort of kick open the door and go, I'm the bad guy, defeating me is the end game, I'll see you every 2 or 3 levels for a chat and maybe a mini boss fight, and that was kind of it. And now obviously you can have these sort of layered relationships. You form odd relationships with villains, because you could just walk away. Like in most games, like not all games, but a lot of the time you are actively chasing the bad thing and actively bringing it on yourself. There's like a codependency there that will, I think, get interesting to explore the more nuanced and the more kind of rich kind of game writing gets.
To summarize, change is good. Embrace it. Your king is alive. Rejoice.